The government of Qatar has announced that they are withdrawing from their role as mediators between Israel and Hamas, one day after announcing that they are expelling the Hamas leadership from their country at the request of the Biden administration in the United States. Later in the program, TBN Israel senior analyst Mati Shoshani will give us an in-depth report about these developments. Meanwhile, over the weekend, the IDF continued to pound Hezbollah targets in the Dacha neighborhood of southern Beirut and throughout Lebanon. But there are also reports that Israel is considering a ceasefire in the north in order to avoid being the target of a UN Security Council resolution. In the Gaza Strip, the IDF is strengthening its positions along the Netzer corridor while responding to the United Nations warning about a famine and a state of emergency in Gaza, declaring that this warning does not correspond to the situation on the ground. Europe is reacting in shock and alarm over an anti-Semitic pogrom in Amsterdam on Thursday evening, when squads of Muslim youth ambushed Israeli soccer fans after a match against a local team and assaulted them on the streets and even inside businesses and hotels. Several Israelis were stabbed, beaten, and run over with cars, prompting Israel's government to dispatch airplanes for an emergency evacuation of Israeli citizens from the city in the Netherlands. We have a lot to discuss today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on the 401st day of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, all of whom are acting under the directives of Iran, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. Before we start, I would like to ask you to look for the subscribe button and click on it so that you'll never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Our sponsor for today's video is Magen David Adom, and we're proud to be partnering with this organization that is working around the clock to save lives in Israel. We'll tell you a bit more about them in a moment, but first, let's dive into the news. The government of Qatar made two dramatic announcements over the weekend. The first was when they said that they had agreed to a demand by the Biden administration in the United States to expel senior Hamas officials from their country. This follows months of failed attempts to try and get the terrorist organization, whose senior leaders live in luxury hotels in the capital of Qatar, Doha, to accept a ceasefire agreement in exchange for the release of the Israeli hostages. For a deeper understanding about what was behind this move, we now turn to our senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani.
Thank you, Yair. As you said, recent developments have seen Qatar agreeing to expel senior Hamas officials from its territory following pressure from the United States. This decision comes after prolonged efforts by the US to persuade Hamas, whose top leadership resides in Doha, to accept a ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. Now, according to reports from American and Qatari sources, the Biden administration decided to increase the pressure on Hamas to accept a ceasefire arrangement that would include returning Israeli hostages, and this was one of the levers of pressure they leaned into. Qatari officials agreed to the US strategy and informed Hamas a week ago that the decision had been made to remove them from Qatar. Immediately following this, Qatar made another shocking announcement that they would no longer serve in the role of mediators between Israel, the US, and the Hamas. They added that they are not completely washing their hands of the negotiation, and it's notable that they have not yet taken concrete steps to follow through on expelling the Hamas leaders. This would all seem to indicate that Qatar is attempting to balance its interests in maintaining its relationship with the US on one side, the other countries in the region on the other side, and Iran, and even its ties with Hamas proper. There are varying reports, but senior Hamas officials in Doha have said that while they've been informed about potential closure of their offices, no action has been taken as of yet, and no demands have been made for them to leave Qatar. Now, regarding Qatar's other big announcement, that they are withdrawing from the role of mediators between, of course, Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, Qatar's foreign ministry clarified that these efforts are merely temporarily frozen, not terminated. They indicated that if no progress is made, they would resume efforts when there is a genuine commitment to ending the conflict. All of this suggests that Qatar has not taken any firm commitments to do anything whatsoever, but is merely sending very strong public signals that they're ready to take these steps as a way of applying pressure on Hamas to be more flexible regarding a hostage deal, which is after all what Israel is working towards. For their part, the Hamas leadership abroad, including figures like Khalid Mash'al and Khalil al-Hayya, have continued to make maximalist demands, including that Israel completely ceases military operations and withdraws from Gaza as a precondition for ever beginning negotiations. They're refusing to compromise on their demands, despite having been utterly defeated on the battlefield, and are in danger of being completely destroyed as a military organization. Now, by freezing mediation, Qatar is pressuring Hamas by stepping back from representing them in negotiations. Without Qatar's support, Hamas lacks a crucial intermediary to convey its positions and influence discussions with Israel. On the other hand, Israel has shown willingness to consider an Egyptian proposal for a small deal, which would involve releasing a limited number of hostages in exchange for a brief ceasefire. This approach aims to build trust and potentially lead to a larger agreement. This proposal was formulated with the involvement of CIA Director Bill Burns, Qatar's Prime Minister, and with Egypt's and Israel's consent. However, the most significant pressure Qatar can exert on Hamas is to cut financial support. Qatar has been a primary financier of Hamas, and threatening to withdraw their support poses a serious challenge to the organization. Hamas recognizes that losing Qatar's backing and potentially being expelled to countries like Lebanon, Turkey, or Syria would greatly weaken their position. The obvious truth is that despite their threat to wash their hands of the mediation efforts, Qatar aims to continue in this role to maintain its regional influence and power. It also has an interest in maintaining its relationship with the US, while also keeping good relationships with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other regional powers. By appearing to play the role of a key mediator, Qatar gives everyone a reason to stay on good terms with them. And this also helps to mediate criticism over its support for Hamas. Meanwhile, Israel is continuing with its own strategy of putting military pressure on Hamas in order to gain leverage in negotiations. The IDF is conducting operations in northern Gaza, targeting militant positions while being cautious to avoid harm to hostages held by Hamas. The IDF is also advancing methodically, clearing areas like Beit Lahia, Bet Hanun, and Jabalia of Hamas fighters, which pressures Hamas both militarily and in terms of governance on the ground. All these operations are doing great damage to Hamas, but there is a great danger that the more desperate they become, the more likely they will be to harm the remaining Israeli hostages they are holding captive. The IDF must balance the desire for battlefield victory with concern and caution for the welfare of those hostages. In this complex situation, Qatar's actions could play a pivotal role in advancing negotiations, but they might also lead to negotiations completely breaking down. A lot depends on the decisions made by what's left of the Hamas leadership. The paradox is that they're being steadily destroyed, but that also means that they have less and less to lose, and that means there is less and less to offer them in return for the hostages. That's the update for now, Yair. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani. A moment before we move to the northern border and Israel's war against the terrorist organization Hezbollah, I would like to invite you to visit our news website at tbnisrael.com to receive regular updates, expert analysis, and in-depth articles on what is happening in Israel. Over the weekend, the IDF continued with Operation Arrows of the North by hitting over 100 Hezbollah targets all over Lebanon, including weapons warehouses and manufacturing sites, rocket firing positions, and individual terrorist leaders. Some of these targets were in the Dakhia neighborhood of southern Beirut, following advance warning to the civilian population in that area. Meanwhile, hundreds of terrorists have been eliminated in exchanges of fire with the IDF troops since the ground operation began. Dozens of Hezbollah tunnels have been cleared and demolished, while massive stockpiles of weapons and ammunition, including thousands of anti-tank missiles, have been captured or destroyed. Hezbollah's much-feared arsenal of rockets has also been severely degraded to the point where an IDF source told the Wall Street Journal this week that they should be very careful with how many they decide to fire in a single barrage. The Hezbollah army has been so badly shattered in the last 2 months of fighting that they have few organized formations left in the field and have already resorted to fighting guerrilla style using small unit hit-and-run tactics against the IDF. The tactics are similar to those used by Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but IDF reservists quoted in the Wall Street Journal story said that even in their reduced capacity, Hezbollah is much stronger, much better trained, and the geographical conditions are much more difficult than Gaza. Partly because of this, Israel is seriously considering the possibility of a time-limited ceasefire agreement on the northern border, according to reports in the media on Saturday evening. The emerging political initiative comes amid deep concerns amongst the decision-makers in Jerusalem about a possible decision by the United Nations Security Council, which could significantly limit Israel's operational freedom of action. Despite the importance of the move, the details of the emerging agreement have not yet been revealed, and the talks continue to be conducted throughout diplomatic channels. The assessments that are taking shape in Israel raise a scenario according to which the United Nations Security Council may soon advance a dramatic resolution that will call for an immediate cessation of fighting in the Gaza Strip, or will impose severe limitations on the IDF's activities in all areas. The fear of such an international decision has intensified, especially in view of the unprecedented political pressure exerted by the Biden administration on Israel in recent weeks, with the aim of preventing further escalation on the northern front. It's important to remember that in the period between the November 2016 election, which saw Donald Trump elected president for the first time, and his taking office in January 20th, 2017, the ongoing Obama administration took several steps that were very damaging to Israel. This included abstaining on the vote of UN Security Council Resolution 2334, allowing it to pass. This resolution enshrined in international law a definition of Jerusalem's old city as being part of the so-called occupied Palestinian territories, and this has caused many problems for Israel ever since. Many Israelis regarded this as a parting shot by the Obama administration at Israel, and there are concerns in Israel today that the Biden administration might do something similar in its last weeks before President Trump returns to the Oval Office. Amidst all of this, data presented by the IDF last week shows that an estimated 2,550 Hezbollah terrorists have been eliminated so far in this war. Another 5,000 are estimated to have been wounded. This is against 110 IDF soldiers and civilians who have been killed by Hezbollah fire since they began launching weapons into Israel on October 8, 2023. Speaking of Hezbollah's weapons, the IDF estimates that 80% of Hezbollah's rocket arsenal, with a range of up to 40 kilometers, have already been destroyed. It is further estimated that at the beginning of the war, Hezbollah had 5,000 medium-range rockets, and today there are less than 1,000. At the beginning of the war, there were over 44,000 short-range rockets, and today less than 10,000 remain. The security establishment also estimated that at the beginning of the war, Hezbollah had hundreds of precision-guided missiles, and today they have less than 100 of these missiles. However, this includes a number of coastal missiles which still pose a theoretical danger to Israel's offshore natural gas platforms. The IDF estimates that because of the scale of the IDF's attacks for the last 13 months, the barrages of thousands of rockets every day that Hezbollah has feared to be able to carry out has largely been neutralized. In addition to the airstrikes, which have destroyed so many of the depots and warehouses where Hezbollah rockets were stored, the launchers and firing positions have also been destroyed. Also, many of the field commanders who had the training and the knowledge needed to direct attacks and the passwords needed to access the computers that operate the launchers have been eliminated. The communications network that Hezbollah uses depended on pagers and walkie-talkies, which they can no longer rely on following Israel's strike using these devices in early September. This has left the remaining Hezbollah operatives who know how to use the relatively primitive rocket launchers that remain to fire random, unaimed barrages that are not coordinated with each other. One of the most notable achievements of the IDF in southern Lebanon focuses on the destruction of Hezbollah's terrorist infrastructure in the Mikpaz villages within a range of 3 kilometers from the border with Israel. These tunnels were meant to be used as staging grounds for the Radwan Force terrorists to storm into northern Israel, into Israeli communities, and carry out massacres, destruction, and kidnapping like what Hamas did on October 7, 2023. The military power of Hezbollah has been so severely degraded that the IDF did not take its possible response into account when making plans to carry out the October 26th airstrike on Iran. This is a major strategic failure of Iran's so-called axis of resistance in the Middle East, which set up Hezbollah for a specific purpose of deterring Israel from attacking Iran. In other words, all of the plans, training, weapons, ammunitions, and equipment that Hezbollah has been preparing to use against Israel for the past 18 years since the Second Lebanon War have proven to be effective. The IDF assesses that although Hezbollah will continue to exist in Lebanon, it will soon have no choice but to withdraw its forces north of the Litani River as UN Security Council Resolution 1701 demands. It is also in a very weakened state in relations to its domestic enemies inside Lebanon, and will have to spend resources and time for that problem, leaving it less time and resources to threaten Israel. Israel is also planning to demand that it will have complete freedom of action in the air and on land in southern Lebanon in order to thwart terrorism near the border. Although the plan is for the Lebanese National Army to be deployed in the region if they do not fulfill their duties to thwart terrorism and smuggling in the area, the IDF will do it for them. These demands are necessary because Israel's security establishment believes that Iran will do everything it can to rehabilitate the terrorist infrastructure in Lebanon and the other countries in the axis of evil, including Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, in order to threaten Israel. Therefore, despite the drawdown of forces in southern Lebanon, the IDF continues to destroy terrorist infrastructure from the air and on the ground, and is preparing to expand ground maneuvers in case the negotiations with Lebanon reach an impasse. On that note, it's important to point out that over the weekend, about 75 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards Israel, including a barrage of 5 which hit the Metula area. As always, the paramedics of Magen David Adom were the first to arrive at the scene, but miraculously, there were no casualties for them to treat this time. I want to tell you a little bit more about the heroes of Magen David Adom, the sponsor of today's video. A few days ago, we aired an episode of the My State series, which featured 2 ordinary men who do extraordinary work for Magen David Adom, including with the response to the Hamas attack of October 7, 2023. You don't want to miss that report, which is available on our YouTube channel. But Magen David Adom does more than just send out brave volunteers to risk their own lives by charging into dangerous situations to save others. They also administer the National Blood Bank of Israel and train soldiers and civilians on emergency first aid. They also maintain a fleet of ambulances and other vehicles, including scooters, helicopters, and even boats that are used to reach everyone who is sick, injured, or otherwise in need of medical assistance. Of course, the happiest occasions are when Magen David Adom volunteers get called to assist in the birth of a new baby, which happens a lot in Israel, by the way. The 35,000 workers of Magen David Adom take care of everyone, including Jews, Arabs, soldiers, tourists, and everyone else in Israel who needs their help. In order to keep doing this sacred work, they need your help because their entire budget comes from donations. So if you want to make a donation to Magen David Adom, you can do so by visiting www.savelifeisrael.com. Now back to the news. Over the weekend, IDF forces eliminated dozens of terrorists and destroyed terrorist infrastructure and a weapons warehouse in the northern Gaza cities of Jabalia and Bet Lahia. At the same time, the fighters of the Nahal Brigade captured stocks of weapons and ammunition in Rafah, eliminated terrorists, and destroyed terrorist infrastructure. Meanwhile, we must recall that this coming Thursday, Israel will be required to respond to the harsh letter sent by the Biden administration in the United States last month, in which an ultimatum was given that if Israel does not stop preventing the transfer of humanitarian aid to Gaza within 30 days, the administration will prevent the transfer of weapons to Israel. With that in mind, the IPC, which is an organization which operates under the auspices of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations to determine the state of food security in countries and geographic regions, published a new report on Friday. This report includes the notation about what it defined as a significant deterioration of the hunger situation in the Gaza Strip. Furthermore, the report called for urgent action to be taken in light of the situation in the northern Gaza Strip and blamed Israel for the conditions there, which it characterized as being on the brink of famine. The coordinator of the government's operations in the territories, Major General Ghassan Aliyan, rejected the findings of the reports, saying that it was based on partial data, biased sources who have an interest in making Israel look bad. He added that reliance on these sources fundamentally damages the credibility of the document. Alongside this, officials in Israel emphasized that the IDF, through the National Security Agency, conducts frequent situation assessments of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, including in the northern Gaza Strip, together with the various humanitarian actors operating there, and accordingly expands and adapts the humanitarian response. At this point, I want to thank you for watching this video and ask that you help us by sharing it on YouTube and following us on social media. If you haven't already, please take a moment and click the subscribe button so that you'll never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground and help us share the truth. We will conclude today's report by looking into the horrifying events in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, on Thursday evening, when a match between the Maccabi Tel Aviv soccer team and the Dutch club Ajax Amsterdam ended in the ambush and assault of hundreds of Israeli fans as they left the game and made their way back to their hotels. The event began with an incident that happened a day earlier, during which one of the Maccabi fans was violently attacked and robbed. The local residents identified through the fan's passport that he was a fighter who had served quite a bit of time in the Gaza Strip over the past year and had even uploaded documents from the fighting on social media networks. Hours before the game, widespread incitement was detected in the local Islamist networks, prompting the Mossad and the Ministry of Diaspora to launch preparations for possible trouble. A warning was also sent to the Dutch intelligence and police forces, both orally and in writing. Other warnings were sent through various channels that there was the possibility of violence surrounding the game. To their credit, the Dutch police took the warning seriously and deployed large numbers of officers to the area around the stadium. But shortly after Israeli fans began to leave the area, they were ambushed by squads of Arabic-speaking young men who were waiting for them on the streets that led to the trains and taxis that the Israeli fans were trying to take back to their hotels. According to witnesses, the police response to these attacks was not organized, and in some cases, police officers barely even tried to intervene as attacks took place right in front of their eyes. Several Israelis were injured in these attacks, which included car ramming and stabbings. Women, children, and the elderly were amongst those who were violently attacked, and at least 5 people required medical attention. A few people were missing for several hours before being accounted for, with some hiding in restaurants or clubs for hours, hoping to be rescued by police who never came to their assistance. By Sunday morning, over 2,000 Israelis have been flown back home on special flights sent by the government to rescue them. The Dutch authorities reacted with statements of shock, anger, and determination to confront the violence, and reports surfaced that several dozen people had been arrested in connection with these attacks. But soon, other reports emerged that all but a small handful had been arrested, and even those who remain in police custody might not be charged with anything because of a lack of evidence. The spokeswoman for the police in Amsterdam was quoted in the New York Times as saying that if people are released, it does not mean that they are no longer suspects. Additional arrests can also be made. The investigation is still ongoing. At the same time, she clarified that indictment had not yet been filed, although Dutch authorities were quick to say that the danger has passed. The IDF advised Israeli travelers that Amsterdam in the Netherlands is under a level 2 travel warning, and therefore it is recommended to take increased precautions when staying in the country, emphasizing the modesty of Israeli symbols as well as vigilance for unusual events in view of the existing sensitivity in Amsterdam, especially following the events. Additionally, Dutch politician Geert Wilders, head of the largest political party in the Dutch parliament, met with Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, who flew to the Netherlands over the weekend. He claims, based on the local report, that all those arrested were arrested during or before the game and not in the riots that happened after. He posted a rhetorical question on X about this, saying no arrests on Thursday night during the hunt for the Jews. He then claimed that the police confirmed to him that all the detainees were arrested during or before the game, adding, none of those who participated in the pogrom were arrested. Back in Israel, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced on Saturday evening that they had brought 2,000 Israelis home from Amsterdam on 10 rescue flights. During the rescue operation, the Embassy of Israel in the Netherlands opened a special office in Amsterdam, and another dedicated emergency office was opened at the headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem. The teams of the Israeli Embassy in the Netherlands, led by Ambassador Moody Efraim and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem, worked to reach all the Israelis who visited the country and issue emergency travel documents to those who had their passports stolen during the pogrom. Meanwhile, videos circulating online showing the methods used by the attackers, which included checking the passports of those claimed that they were not from Israel, alongside beating and threats, until the phrase "Free Palestine" came out of the throats of the Israeli fans that were attacked. I must make a personal comment on all of this. The mayor of Amsterdam is not ready to say that there was an extreme Muslim element here, preferring to talk about this as if it's just another example of soccer fans letting their enthusiasm for their team get out of hand. European leaders have long closed their eyes to the problem that everyone knows is growing in their midst, because they don't want to be accused of racism or being Islamophobic. Also, Europe is heavily dependent on energy supplies from the Middle East, and they don't want to have problems with the governments of these countries, which are predominantly Muslim. Geert Wilders is one of the few European politicians who has dared to speak the truth about this situation publicly, and as a result, he has to be under heavy police protection around the clock. I will say very plainly that more European leaders need to have the same courage that Wilders has shown and face up to the reality that almost everyone who lives in their countries already knows. This includes ordinary citizens and especially police officers, who we hear from sometimes telling us stories about all kinds of incidents that will never be reported on the big newspapers, who are also afraid to honestly face up to what's going on in Europe. Europe is changing, and this pogrom, which happened in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, is just the most recent and perhaps the most blatant example that we can no longer ignore the situation. It's not too late for Europeans to save their countries and their civilization, but they have to stop gaslighting themselves and face the truth. So guys, I'm Yair Pinto, and it is very important for me to ask you to to continue spreading the truth, and pray. Please unite in prayer for the peace of the IDF soldiers wherever they are, in the air, at the sea, or on land. Pray for the peace of the hostages in Gaza, for the speedy return home to their loved ones. Pray for the peace of the people of Israel, and most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, because this is a spiritual war and we need your help.